Scripture reading this morning will come from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 1 through 3 and verse 6. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.
Good morning, church. It's good to have everybody here today, and if you're a guest with us, it's especially good to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us to worship our God. I hope that as everybody was coming in, you got a family report. There's a lot of information in there. There's a lot, especially in the calendar section. To the members of this church, I want to draw your attention to that and just make sure that you know what's going on with our church family. But for everybody, there's a place on the back page that you can take notes along with this message, and it'll coordinate pretty well to what's on the screen. So if you want one of those and you didn't get one, you can raise your hand, and Alex will bring it to you. And I hope that helps us all to track through what we're going to be talking about from the Word today. Happy Mother's Day, moms. I hope that you have been honored and will be honored by your family today in some way. And I hope that everybody, that you can take a chance at some point in some way today to honor your mother, whether she is here in this life or she's already in glory. I hope that you can do that in some way. This button on my coat today, I don't know, some of you know that I kind of like lapel pins, and so I have several that are gifts and that are meaningful to me. This one was my mother's, and I'm wearing it today in her honor. Because I am thankful to God for her. She was truly amazing. And I know that many of us have similar thoughts to that sort of thing today because of this holiday, and I think that's a good, healthy thing. I hope that you enjoyed our guest speaker series last week. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was so grateful to have our brother Higgins here and to teach us and to encourage us to be the people that we should be, and to do it in such a rich, insightful, and enjoyable kind of way. It was just awesome. People forever tell me whenever there's a guest speaker series, they forever come up to me and say, man, as the preacher, it must be nice for you to get to sit and just listen to somebody preach once in a while. And my answer to that is, I really like preaching. And so actually, a lot of the time, I would prefer to just be able to speak. I prefer to do this. But this particular time, I was really grateful to have been taught by somebody so capable and so just into it. Somebody that really cared and was really into what he was teaching us. And so, anyway, I'm saying all that to say, I intend to kind of continue the type of thought this morning. We're going to keep studying some characters from the Bible and hopefully take some rich lessons from them. But I also say that just to encourage you, if you didn't get to hear those messages, they're on the YouTube channel. You should go back and listen, because you will be a better Christian for it if you go back and check those out. So check that out. Make it a priority, I think, to work on your spiritual walk with Christ. Haley, can I borrow the clicker? I've misplaced the other one. Thank you so much. All right, this morning, as I said, we are going to spend a little bit more time looking at some characters from the Bible and looking at their life stories and how their story interacts with God in good ways and bad ways. I want to do this for the next handful of weeks. Just seems like it would kind of be a good thing to do around this time of year as people are starting our travel season and that sort of thing. And so this is the kind of series that we can do and keep it together as a series, but also if you only hear one message, hopefully you got something good out of that just one message. Today, we're going to be talking about Ruth and Naomi. And so if you want to open your Bible to the book of Ruth, you can do that. Our Pew Bibles, that's going to be page 208, if that's helpful for you. And we're going to spend all of our time looking at their story, the story of a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, one of them whom, quite honestly, did not do the best job of serving God, but one of them who really did well with that. I want to point to their story today and quickly show you 6 lessons that will motivate all of us to walk more closely with God. And I'm going to go ahead and let you know, I know this is Mother's Day, and so I picked sort of, kind of a Mother's Day type lesson from the Bible, but it's not all about moms today, okay? This is just one of those lessons that's going to help all of us as Christians as we think about a God-fearing mom helping an outsider just a little bit through this story. So let's just begin with reading Ruth chapter 1, the first 5 verses. Let's read this together. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now, not the greatest feel-good start for a story, is it? This is kind of one of those tragedy stories. We come right out of the gate with some bad things happening, and I think all of us can see how this probably left Naomi quite broken. I think we can easily feel what she suffered by losing her husband and her 2 sons and being away from home while all of that happened as well. It's tragic, and we start the story feeling bad for her. But the challenge with that is, if we're used to reading the Old Testament at this point, we're almost not surprised to hear that these bad things have happened to her. Because Naomi and her husband, they're not really doing the best job of serving God at this point. This is my first point for this morning, is that Naomi went off grid. It's really not the best first steps that you want to see from somebody who is supposed to be a disciple and a servant of God. You see, Naomi and her husband, they're Israelites, and they're supposed to be in the promised land, the land that God gave them, where he promised that he would take care of them. And so when the famine hit, what did they do? Did they stay and trust that God would take care of them? Did they stay in the land where he promised to provide for them? No, they jumped ship. And they head somewhere else. And more specifically, if you see this on a map, you get a real good understanding of the fact that they were going in a direction that God's people really don't need to be going in the Old Testament. Now, this is a particular thing to the Old Testament. This is not a commentary on our lives and how it all works. But in Genesis especially, and also in Exodus, and throughout some of the Judges and the Kings as well, when you see people heading in an eastward direction in the story, they tend to be heading away from the presence of God. Now, if they're moving in a westward direction, they're usually heading toward the presence of God. And so Abraham was called from the east to move toward the west. Cain was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and then he was kicked out further from his parents as he was sent more and more eastward. All of these stories showing that east in these early days symbolizes moving away from God, and west symbolizes moving toward God. Which way did Naomi and her husband go when they were under a time of distress? They moved eastward, which to us as Bible readers is a sign they may not be doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing at this point. They have left the land where God was going to provide for them, and then add to that they've broken God's command about marrying people from other nations. What was it that God had told his people during the time of Moses long before this? You don't marry them. You don't take their daughters as wives for your sons. And yet here's Naomi and her husband taking 2 of the daughters of the Moabites and bringing them to their sons for wives. And then again, what is it that they're doing by heading east? They're looking for salvation and the good life from somewhere other than where they know they will be with God. Now again, I don't mean to just bash somebody who's already beaten down by life in these first 5 verses, but I do just mean to point out the fact that really we're not seeing already a great example of faithfulness from them. That they are looking pretty much anywhere other than where God can be found to find salvation from their problems and the good life that they want. And y'all, I'm afraid sometimes we do the same thing. That we, even as Christians, we tend to look for the good life from other places than where God has said the good life can be found. We listen to every bit of advice from everywhere in the culture except the spoken words of God sometimes. And since today is Mother's Day, let me just point out how we do this in particular when it comes to parenting. You want to know the best techniques and products to bring into your life for a healthy newborn? Well, then you need to get the newest book, listen to 1,000 podcasts, read a blog, take a Facebook poll, and ask the preacher or the preacher's wife. Do you want to know how to teach toddlers the basics of daily life? Well, then you need to get the newest book. You need to listen to 1,000 podcasts, read a blog, take a Facebook poll, ask your parents, and ask the preacher. Do all of those things, and you'll have it right. Do you want to know how to raise middle schoolers and high schoolers without ruining them into their adult lives? What do you need to do? Well, same advice as always. You need to read the newest book, listen to 1,000 podcasts, take a Facebook poll, read a blog, ask your parents, ask the preacher. Do all of those things, and you'll get it right. You want to know how to keep your life together while you're taking care of kids? Same solutions, right? Facebook poll, 1,000 blog posts and podcasts. Get the newest book about how to take care of you during all of that time. Do you notice what's conspicuously absent from all of those solutions? The Word of God. Y'all, sometimes that's what we do. And we're mostly following the clickbait kind of parenting advice, going, this is not your grandmother's way of raising kids, or, this is the secret to happy, healthy, successful parenting. No, the secret has been there all along. And yet we find ourselves blown here and there by every wind of different ideas and different teachings, and the solid foundation that will keep us grounded when the wind tries to blow us around is right there in the Word of God. By the way, if you want a reference point for exactly where to start with the Bible in doing that, look on the front page of today's family report. There's a list of passages right there that are good, solid, eternal parenting advice. That's what we're trying to do here. Naomi and her husband, I know it doesn't read like that to modern readers, but once you know what you're looking at, you can tell these people are going and looking for the solutions to life in other places. They're not sticking with God. And I want to make sure that we learn from that we should and we must stick with being biblically grounded and just doing things God's way. Now, Naomi and her husband, they go off grid and things go badly. So when they come back, it kind of isn't a surprise that she comes back, and I say they don't come back. She does. But she comes back a broken lady. The Naomi that went out of Israel is not the same lady who returns to Israel. And so this is where we get to chapter 1, verse 6. And we have the whole interaction between her and her daughters-in-law. And I'd like to read this just a little bit. Actually, I want to start in verse 19. After it's been decided that one daughter-in-law is going to go back home to Moab and the other is going to stay with Naomi. Here's what it says. So the two women, Naomi and Ruth, went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but Yahweh has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? Yahweh has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. You kind of get a sense here that Naomi is done trying in life. You can see this in the things she says about her name. Naomi is a name that means pleasantness. Mara is a name that means bitterness. And she says, just go ahead and just change my name. Don't even call me by what you used to call me, because I'm not that person anymore. God has been too unkind to me, and I am too broken to even be considered the same person that you all once knew. I don't like it. I feel so bad for the assessment that she makes of how her life has gone in verse 21. I went away full, and Yahweh has brought me back empty. Why would you call me a name that means pleasantness when Yahweh has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity on me? Y'all, here's the deal. She's heading west again, which is good. She's coming back into the presence of God, but she's doing it as an act of desperation. She's coming back to God because she's run out of options. She's got nothing left. This is her last resort to find the good life. And she doesn't believe that she's going to have it. She sees herself as broken, as rejected by God, as a cast-off of the spiritual realm. Now, she's back with God, sure, but not in any sort of really vibrant spiritual life, is it? And y'all, again, I'm kind of afraid that sometimes we do that in our lives too. That we turn to God as a last resort. After we've tried all the things that we've read in 1,000 blog posts and podcasts and Facebook polls, we come back and we go, well, I guess really all that's left is just, at least I can try to keep their faith intact. I can try to raise them, I guess, to be a good Christian. As though that were like the lowest thing you could hope for. Y'all, that's kind of what we do. We come back to God as this act of desperation. Like we look at Him and say, I've tried everything else and nothing else works. I'm out of parenting ideas and I thought it would go well, but God, you didn't help. And all I can do now is just sort of, I don't know, I guess try to be a good Christian and hopefully they will too. Like, that sounds wrong, doesn't it? It sounds like the wrong way to approach this, but sometimes that's what we do. Now, I think in our better moments, we can hear how wrong that sounds, but we are sometimes so much like Naomi. We blame God for things going badly when all along we didn't follow His way of doing things. We went somewhere else rather than staying with Him. And then when we come back to Him, it's not because we see value in Him, it's because we're exhausted and bitter. And there's nowhere else to go. I don't want that for y'all. I don't want that for me. I want us to learn better from Naomi. Now, so far, this Israelite woman in the story, she should be the example of like goodness and faithfulness to God. She's from Israel, after all, you know. She's not doing so great so far, is she? Not exactly. And it's not going to get a whole lot better in the next few events, because I think this is yet another place where we see Naomi trying to do things in a way that's not only not seeking God, it's fully against the plan of God, I think, in this next section. We're still in Ruth, so now let's go down to chapter 3. They're back in the land of Israel, and she's hopeful that she's going to be able to make some good things happen for her widowed daughter-in-law, Ruth. She's hopeful that they can get her with a man and maybe give her the chance to bear some children. And so this is her plan, starting in chapter 3, verse 1. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. So, you wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. And then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know that you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, another version says, when his heart was merry, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. Now pause there. Maybe as you're reading that, you're thinking to yourself, this is a weird plan. Like, why not go to him in the daylight? Why wait until he's eaten and drunk something that the text says his heart was merry? Other places in the text where we read that phrase, it's because somebody's a little bit tipsy. Why does she want to get now, or why does she want Ruth to get all dolled up and go to him secretly at night when no one else will know she's there? What is Naomi expecting will happen? Yeah, what is Naomi expecting is going to happen when a younger woman comes to an older man alone at night and just says, he'll tell you what to do? It's Sunday morning church and it's a mixed audience and the Bible doesn't say any more than that, so that's all I'm going to say too. But it just doesn't sound good, does it? Now granted, Ruth and Boaz could not have handled this awkwardness any better than they actually did. So the story gets cleaned up real quick. But the question is, What is Naomi thinking? Has she really set all of this up for her daughter-in-law and a man that she wants to bring into her family to be led into temptation, into some sort of unrighteous behavior? And all this just reminds us of something that I think needs to be said once in a while, brothers and sisters, and that is that parents, if we are the cause of our children being tempted to sin, we are doing a grave and dangerous disservice to them. If we pressure our kids into some sort of immorality, we put our souls and theirs at risk. I'm a little afraid that sometimes I have seen a Naomi-type behavior among my sisters in Christ, and I just hate that. We encourage a younger woman to behave in a way that is not becoming of a Christian at all. Because we want her to go get this man, we want her to wrangle somebody and keep him with that sort of thing, and it's just not right. Sometimes we do it with false ideas, wrong-headed goals, or even just with jokes, but we better not do it at all, brothers and sisters. We better not be the ones who nudge or tempt our kids toward any sort of ungodly lifestyle. Jesus talked in Matthew 18:6 about people who cause temptation in other people. And he said it's better for that person if a millstone, which is a rock yay big, was put on a rope, hung around your neck, and you were tossed into the ocean with it. That's not going to end well. All right, I don't know if you know about fluid dynamics, but rocks sink. Humans that go with it don't really come back up. Jesus says it's better for you to have that happen if you are the cause of somebody's sin, if you provoke them into some sort of temptation. And so Naomi, like I had it in my head that she was doing really well in her spiritual life and bad things just sort of happened to her. But I'm not sure anymore that that's the case. It doesn't seem like that's the case. And so the question is, if the Israelite lady in this story is not the example of godliness that she should be, do we have one? Do we have an example of godliness and faithfulness? And the example is yes, in a big way. But it's not somebody from the land of Israel. It's Ruth. And I want to show you 3 quick lessons from Ruth about how she behaves in an incredibly, wonderfully godly way. 3 quick things here about her life that just give an example for all of us. First thing that Ruth does right, and probably the most memorable thing that Ruth does right, is her loyalty to Naomi. She sticks with her mother-in-law through so much up and down of life. And you see this in several places. You see this in chapter 1 in the most dramatic way. Chapter 1, she won't leave Naomi, even though Naomi says, you should go back to your own people group. You're not an Israelite. I'm not going to force my custom and my religion on you. You go back to your people. And Ruth says these beautiful words in chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. I love this. It never gets old. She says, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Shakespeare never wrote a passage of loyalty that sounded that good. This is as good as it gets. This language is beautiful. This woman leaves her family, her tribe, and her home behind, knowing she will not come back, so that she can go with Naomi, who kind of is family, but also kind of isn't family at the same time. And she is there with her to go live among Naomi's people and serve Naomi's God. You see her loyalty again in the next chapter when she's the one who voluntarily goes out to work and provide for Naomi. You see her loyalty again in the next chapter, that even though she's not planning to go through with what Naomi intended for this plan, she is there to follow instructions as far as they're righteous. She also, you see this in chapter 4, that even after Ruth gets married, she continues to care for Naomi and welcome her into their lives of their family. The loyalty that she demonstrates here is nothing short of amazing. And it's just a really good reminder for us about the incredible importance of family. for those of us who are Christians and have Christian family. Whether you're talking about the family that you're born into, the family that you marry into, or the family that you're born again into, family matters so much. The people in our lives matter so much. And we heard a lot about that this past week in our guest speaker series, about the importance of leading others to Jesus. That's what encouragement is all about. We heard about it when Josh talked about just showing up. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be there sometimes. Just showing up is all the encouragement that somebody needs, because they matter and we matter to them. And then we talked about with Barnabas the importance of generosity. The kind of loyalty that says, whatever you need, I will give it. I'll work for it. I'll be there and do that for you. Ruth did all of that for Naomi in a relationship where she could have walked away pretty easily at some point. She went the extra mile, and then the second, and then the third, and then the fourth extra miles to be there again and again and again for Naomi. And it just shows how important family really ought to be. Now, I think, though, even better than that is the example of her faithfulness to God that we see in this. Because Naomi was told by Ruth, your people will be my people, and nothing but death will separate us. But I think the key phrase in this story, and the key phrase for the longevity and the extra reach of this story, is where Ruth says, your God will be my God. This is absolutely crucial in understanding her place in the Bible story. She knew God and she served Him in her life. And this is really remarkable when you think about the country that she has come from, because Naomi actually says to her, you can go back home, you can go back to your family, and you can go back and serve your gods. She actually points out to the fact that these two ladies, her two daughters-in-law, that they are women who serve idols. And yet Ruth says, no, I'm done with those gods. I'm going to follow you. Your God will be my God. And that is in the singular. Because it was a uniquely Jewish thing to worship only one God. And it was quite a dramatic transformation for people to go from worshiping idols to worshiping one God. Now, I know it's a dramatic thing any time in history when somebody changes their religion, okay? When somebody switches religious affiliations, that's usually fairly dramatic. It's becoming less so because our culture is becoming more secular, but it's still a pretty big deal. But it's not anything like the drama that it involved in the ancient world, where switching away from serving idols to serve the living and true God, that would get you thrown out of a community, like a town. That would get you thrown out of your family for the rest of your life. And here, very much like Paul commends the Christians in Thessalonica for doing that, Ruth takes a step that says, I'm done with the other gods, and I will serve the one true and living God with the rest of my life. Now, just for her to say that in the first place is pretty impressive. But then you add to that, when her moral standing, when her moral purity was tested, when it was tested to see if she would actually live God's way, Ruth behaved flawlessly. I read the story a little while ago about all the setup that Naomi does to kind of put Ruth and Boaz together. And the setup sounds kind of sketchy. But if you start again in chapter 3 and you read verses 7 down to 15, what you'll find there is that Ruth and Boaz are very conscientious about the way that they do not violate the purity that they should have before God. Even to the point where the next morning they wake each other up early so that they can leave and no one will see anything that would make them suspicious. They want to make sure that everything looks like it's on the up and up, that no one is going to have any reason to doubt them because they've not even seen that they were together. What indiscretions are committed between a man and a woman in the middle of the night in this story? None. And that's wonderful. That's a good demonstration of the fact that she cares about serving God. And so the question is, do we take our spiritual lives just as seriously? That's what I think is so great about Ruth, is that she wants to serve God, so she does it. She doesn't argue with God about what's right and what's wrong. She doesn't commit a sin and then try to rationalize or justify it. She doesn't commit a sin and say, well, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. None of that happens in her life. She knows what is the right thing to do to serve this God, and she does it. And it's a great, powerful testimony to us about what we're called to do as well. Now, I know the story of Ruth isn't that long, so there's not a whole lot about her morality in here, but I do have to point out that there's nothing bad said about her. There's not a thing that you can look at in this story and say, well, there's the thing that she did wrong. There's the sin she committed. What we have in Ruth is yet another story of a person who is not from God's chosen people, behaving in a way that shows more faith than God's chosen people. And that tells me that this is a lady whose heart has been given to God. She said to Naomi, your God will be my God. And apparently, she meant it. It's the way that she lived her life. Would the same be proven true of us? Now, you kind of can't do this story without pointing out the fact that Boaz is also a really good man. Like, there's a whole lot about the whole redemption thing that happens in chapter 3 and into chapter 4 that I just don't have the time to explain this morning. I thought about doing it, but it's just a little complex for what we're trying to get accomplished in this message this morning. So I decided not to. But what's really impressive about him is his moral stance, number one, that he keeps himself pure when he has the opportunity to be disobedient to God and to do something that is indiscreet. Okay? He keeps himself pure there. And then you add to that his generosity and his following God's law and the plan God had in place to care for this widow and her widowed mother-in-law. What he does is wonderful. It's remarkable, and it's really special that he does these things. What might be even more special about that is when you know that Boaz himself did not come from a line of people who had a clean record when it came to sexual immorality. Now, Ruth doesn't tell us who Boaz is descended from, but in the genealogy of Jesus that Matthew records in Matthew chapter 1, we do find out the name of his parents. Boaz's father was a man named Salmon. It's spelled just like salmon. It is exactly what you think, okay? His father was a man named Salmon. His mother was a woman named Rahab. Boaz's mom is Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho. And yet this is a story of a woman. Now we got a whole new thing just unlocked in our brains right there, right? Because now we have a story of another woman who is not from Israel, who displays remarkable faith in God and comes into the story of Israel in a way that she actually serves God and becomes faithful to Him for the rest of her life, marries an Israelite, has a son who is one of the heroes of faith in the Old Testament. All of this comes together to just show what happens when people are willing to go with God. And by the way, just a little nuance to this story that I think is absolutely remarkable when you think about Boaz's mother being Rahab. What that means is that in her lifetime, Ruth had two mothers-in-law, and they are on opposite trajectories. One of them is an Israelite who starts off well, and her story just kind of gets a little bit worse as it goes along, and you wonder, what's she really up to? The other one is not an Israelite. She starts off in deep worldliness, but as her story goes on, she gets closer and closer to God. She serves Him better and better, and she becomes more and more a part of His chosen people. I'm sure glad that Ruth learned from the one and not the other. And isn't it kind of remarkable that she ends up learning from the one whom she may have never even met? But she sees the value of serving God, even past the person nearest her who's not doing the best job with that. And she goes after God. She had a choice, and she chose to go with God. All of which begs the question for the modern world, whom will you choose to serve and follow? Will you go the way that God is calling you to go? Will you make sure that Ruth's God, the God of faithful people like her, is your God forever too? Now, that gets us to the end of the story. Chapter 4 of the book of Ruth tells us how the whole thing leads to Ruth going down in Bible history as one of the great servants of God. Can I start reading again, this time in chapter 4, verse 13? So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better for you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, who was the father of King David. Here's where Ruth becomes a mom, and here's where her honorable place in the Bible storyline is absolutely solidified. Ruth is a godly woman, not from the people of God, but who served God at every opportunity she had. And what was her reward in the grand scheme of history? Ruth is the mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother of kings. She steps into a story where she has no right to be, and yet God gives her the right to not only be in that story, but to reward her as the generations back mother of an entire line of kings. And I think the lesson in that is pretty plainly stated, and it's in the passage that Sam read just before I got up here to speak. From Hebrews 11 and verse 6, we are told the promise there that God rewards those who seek Him earnestly. That is a promise that has always been part of God's nature. And it's a promise that's still part of God's nature. It's still a promise that He makes for us. Is He going to fulfill that in exactly the same way for every single person? No, of course not. But for those who seek Him diligently, no matter where you start from, if you follow Him, if you go with Him like Ruth did, then He will reward that faithfulness. In His own time, in His own ways, but He will reward that faithfulness. And so the question here, for us to think about how to put this part of the message into our lives and put it to work, is, do you believe that? And are you still seeking Him? The subtitle for this message, you can see it on the family report, you can see it there on the bottom of the screen as well on the title slide, is When a God-Fearing Mom Helps an Outsider. Now, when I started saying we were going to talk about Ruth and Naomi, which one did you think was which? Which one did you think was the God-fearing mom, and which one did you think was the outsider? I got to tell you, for me, I think this story is of Ruth helping Naomi much more than it is the other way around. Yeah, Naomi, maybe leads the way walking into Israel, but beyond that, Naomi had a lot to learn from her daughter-in-law Ruth, from the way that she went with Naomi, went with God, and through both of those went down in history. It's a remarkable story of a remarkable lady. And I hope that it's an inspiring reminder for us about the good things that can happen when somebody truly, faithfully seeks God. If you're an outsider, and by that I mean if you're not a saved person who knows Jesus and is walking with God, and if you're ready to change that and to be faithful to Him, we want to give you an opportunity today to be baptized in the name of Jesus and become the outsider who became an insider, who follows Him with your whole life, so that in everything, you can live with the promise hanging over your head that God rewards those who seek Him. So if we can help you with that, if you want to talk to me or one of the elders of this church about it, why don't you come forward while we're standing and singing this hymn and let us know about that.